My mother copied 52 relatives on an email titled, "Cost of Raising a Failure," attaching an invoice for $347,000. She expected me to apologize. Instead, I replied with a single photograph. By the next morning, nearly everyone had blocked her. Everyone except my grandmother. Her response wasn't a block. It was a death sentence. My name is Mila Knight. I am 33 years old, and up until last Sunday, I existed in the quiet, calibrated margins of a life I built in Lakewood, Colorado. My life is boring by design. I like spreadsheets. I like hiking trails where the elevation gain is predictable. I like my husband, Wyatt Blake, because he says exactly what he means and never uses silence as a weapon. We pay our mortgage on the first of the month. We do not have drama. We do not have secrets. Or at least, that is what I tell people. The truth is, you do not become a risk analyst because you love numbers. You become a risk analyst because you spent your entire childhood waiting for the floor to drop out, and eventually, you figure out how to calculate the velocity of the fall. The floor dropped out on Mother's Day, but not in Colorado. It happened in the Finger Lakes, New York, inside the sprawling, cedar-shingled lake house that belongs to my grandmother. Nora Halstead, my mother, Marianne Knight, had organized the reunion. She called it a celebration of heritage. But anyone who knows my mother knows that Marianne does not celebrate things. She curates them. She had spent 6 months demanding RSVPs, coordinating color palettes for the family portraits, and ensuring that every cousin, aunt, and in-law within a 500-mile radius would be present. She needed a full house. You cannot perform a crucifixion without an audience. After all, I knew something was wrong the moment we pulled into the gravel driveway on Friday. The air in the house was too tight. My sister, Blair, was already there, floating around with a glass of Pinot Grigio, looking like the golden child she was minted to be. Blair is 36, beautiful in a way that requires high maintenance, and has never paid a bill on time in her life. Yet, when I walked in, carrying my own luggage, my mother looked at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, "Oh, Mila, you made it. We were betting on whether you would miss your flight. Again." I haven't missed a flight in 10 years, but that is the narrative. Mila the mess, Mila the chaotic one, Mila the failure. The execution happened on Sunday morning. I was in the kitchen, trying to find a clean mug, when my phone vibrated, then it vibrated again. Then it began to buzz incessantly. A continuous, angry hum against the granite countertop, across the room. Wyatt checked his phone and went completely still. He looked at me, his face draining of color, and said, "Mila, don't open your email." But I had already tapped the screen. The subject line was written in all caps. Cost of Raising a Failure. I stared at it. The timestamp was 8:45 in the morning. I looked at the recipient list. It wasn't just sent to me, it was carbon copied to 52 people. My aunts, my uncles, my cousins, the neighbors my mother had grown up with, even the pastor of the church she attended sporadically. She had CC'd my husband, she had CC'd my father. My fingers felt cold, detached, as if they belonged to someone else. I opened the attachment. It was a PDF. Formatted to look like a legitimate professional invoice. At the top, in bold, elegant font, was my mother's letterhead. Below that, a table with columns for dates, descriptions, and amounts. It was an itemized list of my existence. Item 1, obstetrical hospital fees, 1991, $4,000. Item 2, formula and diapers, 1991 to 1993. $3,500. Item 3, elementary school clothing, 1996, $600. She had listed everything, the braces I wore when I was 12, the piano lessons I hated, but she forced me to take, the prom dress I bought at a thrift store but she claimed she paid for, the gas money for driving me to soccer practice, a speeding ticket from when I was 17, the cost of food, the cost of electricity, the cost of water. I scrolled down. my eyes scanning the data with the detached precision of my profession. I did not cry. I did not feel the sting of tears. I felt the familiar, icy click of my brain shifting into audit mode. I looked for discrepancies. I looked for inflation. Item 42, college tuition assistance, 2010, $25,000. I stopped scrolling. That was a lie. I had taken out student loans. I was still paying them. At the bottom of the invoice, bolded and double underlined, was the grand total: $347,112.44, below the total. She had written a note: payment due upon receipt. Consider this the price of your disappointment. Mila, Wyatt said, his voice low and dangerous. She sent this to everyone. She sent this to your boss's old email address. She sent this to the entire family. I looked up. Through the kitchen archway, I could see the living room. It was packed. The entire clan was there, holding paper plates of quiche and cups of coffee. But nobody was eating. They were all looking at their phones. A heavy, suffocating silence had descended over the room, the kind of silence that precedes a natural disaster. And then, standing by the stone fireplace, I saw her. Marianne was wearing a cream-colored silk blouse and holding a glass of champagne, even though it was barely 9 a.m. She wasn't looking at her phone. She was looking at me. She smiled. It was a terrifying, serene smile. Next to her, on the mantelpiece, where the family photos usually stood, was a new addition. She had printed the invoice. She had printed it on high-quality cardstock, placed it in a heavy, ornate silver frame, and displayed it like a diploma. She didn't just want me to pay. She wanted me to break. She wanted the scene. She wanted me to scream, to cry, to throw a tantrum so she could turn to her sister and say, See how unstable she is. See what I have to deal with. I walked into the living room. Wyatt was right behind me, his hand hovering near the small of my back, a silent promise of violence if anyone touched me. The room parted. My Aunt Sarah looked away, unable to meet my eyes. My cousin Greg was staring at the framed invoice with his mouth slightly open. My father, Caleb, was sitting in the corner, staring at the floor, looking as useless as he had been for the last 30 years. I stopped 5 feet away from my mother. Happy Mother's Day, Marianne, I said. My voice was steady. It didn't shake. Did you get my email? She asked, her voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. She wanted everyone to hear. I thought it was time we settled accounts. Mila, I have spent my life pouring resources into a bottomless pit. I think it is fair that the family knows exactly what it costs to raise a daughter who contributes nothing. Contributes nothing. Wyatt stepped forward. Wyatt, I said softly. He stopped. Marianne laughed. A tinkling, brittle sound. Oh, don't let him fight your battles. Mila, that is all you have ever done. Found men to clean up your messes. But you can't clean up this debt. $347,000. That is what you owe me for the burden of your existence. She gestured to the room. I want everyone here to witness this. We talk about family supporting family. But there has to be a limit. Mila is my limit. I looked at the invoice in the frame. I looked at the specific line item for college tuition. I looked at the line item for wedding expenses. Another $20,000 she claimed to have spent on a wedding that Wyatt and I had paid for ourselves in a courthouse. She was rewriting history. She was counting on the fact that nobody keeps receipts from 15 years ago. She was banking on the fact that I was the quiet one, the one who moved away, the one who didn't come to Christmas because I couldn't afford the ticket. She controlled the narrative because she controlled the microphone. I looked at Wyatt. His jaw was clenched so hard I could see the muscle jumping. He looked down at me, and he asked me the only question that mattered. Do you want to end this the way they wrote the script? He whispered. Or do you want to end it the way you write the ledger? The ledger. He was talking about the folder on my phone, the folder I had started 3 years ago, the folder named Ledger. I had spent my whole life thinking I was crazy, thinking I was misremembering things. So, being a risk analyst, I started collecting data. I didn't collect it for revenge. I collected it for sanity. I needed to know if I was actually the failure, or if the game was rigged. I looked at my mother. She was glowing with the adrenaline of her performance. She was waiting for me to apologize. She was waiting for me to beg. I pulled out my phone. "I'm not going to argue with you, Mom," I said. "Because you can't," she snapped. "No," I said, "because the math doesn't work." I opened my email app. I opened her email. I hit reply all. I did not type a single word. I did not write a defense. I did not explain that I had worked 3 jobs in college. I did not explain that the wedding expenses she listed were actually for a vacation she took to Cabo the week after I got married. I just attached one photo. It was a photo I had been saving for a long time. A photo of a document that shouldn't exist, contradicting a story she had told this family for a decade. I pressed send. The sound of the email swooshing away was silent, but in my head, it sounded like a gunshot. "What are you doing?" Marianne asked, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "Check your inbox," I said. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a pocket buzz. Then another. Then a chime. My cousin Greg looked at his phone first. He frowned. He zoomed in on the image. Then he looked up at Marianne. And his expression changed from shock to something darker. Something like confusion mixed with disgust. My Aunt Sarah checked hers. She gasped. A short, sharp intake of breath. She looked at me, then at Marianne, and she took a literal step backward, away from my mother. The energy in the room shifted. It wasn't the slow turn of a tide. It was a snap. 1 second. Marianne was the righteous prosecutor. The next, she was the suspect standing under a harsh light. Marianne fumbled for her own phone. She pulled it out of her pocket. I watched her face as she saw what I had sent. Her face went white, not pale, white, like the blood had simply decided to evacuate her body. "This," she stammered, "this is fake. Mila fabricated this. It has a bank stamp on it." "Marianne," Uncle Robert said from the back of the room. His voice was hard. He was a CPA. He knew what a wire transfer looked like. "It is out of context," she shrieked. The composure was gone. The silk blouse suddenly looked like a costume. I didn't stay to watch the rest. I didn't need to. The invoice in the silver frame was still on the mantelpiece. But nobody was looking at it anymore. They were looking at the woman who had put it there. "Come on," I said to Wyatt. We walked out. We walked past my father, who was still staring at the floor, though now his hands were shaking. We walked out the front door, down the porch steps, and toward our rental car. I didn't look back. We drove to a motel in the next town over. I turned off my notifications, but I could see the screen lighting up. It didn't stop for hours. By the next morning, the silence from the family was deafening, but it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of bridges burning. I checked my social media over coffee. Marianne's Facebook page, usually a shrine to her own martyrdom, was inaccessible. My aunt had blocked her. My cousins had blocked her. Even the pastor seemed to have removed her tag from the church picnic photos. The reply all had worked. The crowd had turned. They had seen the crack in the porcelain doll. I thought that was it. I thought I had won. I thought we would fly back to Colorado, and I would finally be free of the cost of raising a failure. But then my phone buzzed with a standard text message. Not an email, not a Facebook notification, a text. It was from Grandma Nora Halstead, the matriarch, the woman who owned the house, the money, and the legacy. She had been standing in the corner yesterday, leaning on her cane, watching the entire scene with eyes that looked like polished flint. She hadn't said a word. She hadn't checked her phone when I sent the email. I opened the message. 9 a.m, tomorrow. Come to the house. Come alone. Bring your phone. I stared at the screen. My stomach twisted. Grandma Nora didn't do drama. She didn't do reply all. She dealt in absolute power. I thought the photo I sent was the nuclear option. I thought I had destroyed Marianne's reputation. I was wrong. What I did was just a slap in the face. What Grandma Nora was about to do, that wasn't a slap. That was a verdict, and unlike my mother, Nora Halstead never sent an invoice she couldn't collect. To understand why I sent that email, you have to understand the economy of my childhood. I do not mean money, not yet. I mean the economy of affection, in the Knight household. Love was not a renewable resource. It was a fixed currency, minted by my mother, and strictly allocated based on a fluctuating market of her own design. My sister, Blair, was the gold standard. I was the inflation that made the currency worthless. Blair is 3 years older than me. She is 36 now. Growing up, she was the one who fit the mold. She was a cheerleader, but the kind who was also student body president. She went to the university my mother selected. She married the man my mother approved of, a man who wears boat shoes and laughs a little too loudly at bad jokes. For 33 years, I lived in the shadow of the Blair Knight Index. When Blair turned 16, there was a party at the country club with a DJ and a 3-tiered cake. When I turned 16, we went to a chain Italian restaurant, and my mother spent the entire dinner complaining that the breadsticks were too salty. When Blair got promoted, there was a Facebook post with 14 exclamation points and a weeping emoji. When I graduated with honors, I got a text message. It said, "Good job. Dad says hi." No emoji, no exclamation point, just a period. That period was a weapon. It was a wall. It was the grammatical equivalent of a door slamming in your face. This was the soft violence of my upbringing. It wasn't bruises. It was the slow, grinding erosion of being the difficult one, the one who was exhausting, the one who made Mom tired. I grew up believing that my very existence was a tax on my mother's happiness. That is why I became a risk analyst. I work for a company called Stonebridge Ledger Works. It is not a glamorous job. We do not have beanbag chairs or cold brew on tap. We have gray cubicles and dual monitors and silence. I love it. I love it because in risk analysis, there is no subtext. A credit score is not passive-aggressive. A debt-to-income ratio does not sigh heavily when you walk into the room. Numbers do not lie to protect your feelings, but they also do not lie to hurt them. They just are. I found safety in the binary nature of data. If X, then Y. If you spend more than you earn, you go broke. If you invest wisely, you grow. The world made sense in spreadsheets in a way it never did at my mother's dining table. It was this obsession with objective reality that led me to Wyatt. Wyatt Blake is not the kind of man my mother understands. He is a structural engineer. He looks at a bridge and sees the load-bearing beams. He does not care about the paint color. When we met, I was a nervous wreck, constantly apologizing for taking up space, constantly anticipating a criticism that hadn't happened yet. Wyatt didn't try to fix me with poetry. He didn't tell me I was a goddess or a queen. The first time I had a panic attack about money, I had dropped a $20 bill and couldn't find it. He didn't tell me it was okay. He sat down, opened a notebook, and wrote down our budget. He showed me, mathematically, that the loss of $20 would not result in our starvation. "Look at the column," he had said, tapping the paper with a mechanical pencil. "The data says we are safe. Trust the data. Mila, not the fear." That was the moment I fell in love with him. He respected boundaries. He respected evidence. He was the first person in my life who didn't demand an emotional performance in exchange for security. But for a long time, I kept my two worlds separate. There was the logical world I built with Wyatt, and the emotional, chaotic world of being Marianne Knight's disappointment. I told myself that my mother was just strict. I told myself she was hard on me because she wanted me to be better. I swallowed the narrative that I was the problem. Then the data from my personal life started to glitch. It began with small things, anomalies, the kind of things a risk analyst notices even when she is trying not to. I remember the day it started. I was 22, fresh out of college, looking for my first apartment in Denver. I had found a small studio with a view of a brick wall. It was perfect. I had a job lined up. I had savings from working double shifts at the library. I had never taken a loan. I had never owned a credit card because my mother had warned me they were traps for irresponsible people. I filled out the application with the confidence of someone who has nothing to hide. 2 days later, the leasing agent called me. Her voice was not professional, it was pitying. "I am sorry, Ms. Knight," she had said. "We cannot approve the lease. Your credit history is problematic." I remember standing in the parking lot of the grocery store, holding a bag of apples, feeling the world tilt. There must be a mistake. I had said, "I do not have a credit history. I have zero debt." "That is not what the report says," she replied. "You have 3 credit cards in collections, and a default on a utilities account from 4 years ago." 4 years ago? I was 18. I was living in a dorm room. I called my mother in a panic. I was crying. I thought my identity had been stolen by a stranger. I thought hackers had targeted me. My mother's reaction was strange. She didn't gasp. She didn't get angry on my behalf. Her voice on the phone was smooth, calm, almost bored. "Oh, Mila," she had sighed. "You probably just signed up for something on campus and forgot. You know how scatterbrained you are. You probably clicked a box on a website for a free t-shirt and didn't read the fine print." "But Mom," I insisted, "it is thousands of dollars. It is a utility bill. I lived in a dorm. We will handle it." She cut me off. "Don't make a scene. You always make everything into a tragedy. I will talk to your father. We will help you fix your mess." Again, she made me feel grateful. She made me feel like she was saving me from my own stupidity. I let her handle it. I never saw the report. I just knew that a month later, she told me it was sorted out and that I should be more careful with my personal information. That was the seed. It sat in the back of my mind for years, dormant. But as I got older, as I became a professional who looked for patterns in fraud, the seed began to sprout. There were other incidents. A letter from the IRS about an amended return I never filed. A call from a collection agency looking for Mila Knight regarding a medical bill for a procedure I never had. Each time, I brought it to Marianne. Each time, she spun a web of explanations. Mail mix-up, system error, identity theft is so common these days. "Mila, stop being paranoid." And always, the refrain, "We are a transparent family. We have no secrets." I realized later that transparency is the favorite word of the person holding the curtain shut. If you say you are transparent enough times, people stop looking for the hidden accounts. Wyatt was the one who pointed out the pattern. We were sitting at our kitchen table 2 years ago, looking at a rejection letter for a mortgage pre-approval. The interest rate they offered us was astronomical because my credit score, despite my diligent payments, was anchored by old delinquencies. "Mila," Wyatt said, "this isn't bad luck. This is geometry. These points all form a line. And the line points to one zip code." He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. I thought about the cost of raising a failure invoice she sent out on Mother's Day. The audacity of it. The sheer, unadulterated projection. She wasn't just mean. She was covering her tracks. She needed me to be a failure. If I was a failure, if I was irresponsible, chaotic, and bad with money, then any financial irregularity attached to my name made sense. It was just Mila being Mila. If I was successful, if I was competent, then the debts in my name became crimes. She had been building a cover story for my entire life. I think Grandma Nora knew, or at least, she suspected. My grandmother is a woman of few words. She is the kind of woman who can silence a room by sipping her tea. Growing up, I was terrified of her. She seemed cold, but looking back, I realized she wasn't cold to me. She was watching. There was a moment. The Christmas before I stopped coming home, when I was sitting on the porch of the lake house, freezing, because there was no room for me on the sofas inside. Blair was holding court by the fire, recounting a vacation to Italy. Grandma Nora came out. She didn't tell me to come inside. She didn't offer me a blanket. She stood next to me, looking out at the frozen lake. "The ice looks solid," she had said, "but it is thin in the middle. You have to know where to walk." I nodded, not understanding. She turned to me. Her eyes were sharp, blue steel. "If a day comes when you have to stand alone, Mila, stand straight. Do not lean. Leaning makes you easy to push over." At the time, I thought it was just cryptic old lady advice. Now, I know it was a warning. She saw the way Marianne chipped away at me. She saw the way the family hierarchy was constructed to keep me on my knees. That brings us back to yesterday. To the invoice. To the photo I sent. When I hit reply all. I wasn't trying to hurt my mother. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was just tired. I was tired of the narrative. I was tired of being the villain in her play so she could be the martyr. I told Wyatt the night before we left for the reunion, I do not want them to love me anymore. I gave up on that when I was 20. I just want them to leave me alone. I want to be left in peace. But Marianne couldn't give me peace. Peace doesn't have an audience. Peace doesn't get likes on Facebook. She needed a finale. She needed to present the bill for her motherhood and have the world applaud her sacrifice. She wanted a show. So, I gave her one. I just didn't use her script. I used my ledger. And now, as I sat in the motel room, staring at the text message from Grandma Nora, I realized that the show wasn't over. The curtain hadn't fallen. 9 a.m. Come alone. My mother had spent 33 years calculating the cost of raising me. She had itemized every diaper, every meal, every moment of care. She thought she was the only one keeping score. She forgot that grandmothers keep scores too. And Nora Halstead's math was entirely different. Marianne was counting dollars. I had a feeling Nora was counting sins. And tomorrow morning, the audit was going to begin. You might think that I created the folder named Ledger in a fit of rage. You might imagine me drinking a bottle of wine, crying over old photo albums, and deciding to burn the house down. But that is not how it happened. Rage is messy. Rage makes mistakes. The folder on my phone, and the encrypted backup on Wyatt's secure server, was born out of silence. It was born 3 years ago on a Tuesday afternoon when I realized that my mother's version of reality was not just a difference of opinion. It was a strategic campaign. I did not start the ledger to attack her. I started it to defend myself. I needed a shield. When you are told for 3 decades that you are crazy, that you are forgetful, that you are bad with money, you eventually stop arguing, but you do not have to stop looking. The folder contains 3 subdirectories. I organize them with the same filing system I use for corporate risk assessments. Folder A is labeled Education and Liquidity. Folder B is labeled Internal Revenue and Taxation. Folder C, the heaviest one, is labeled Consumer Credit and Identity. For 3 years, I became an archaeologist of my own financial history. Wyatt was instrumental in this. He did not ask why I needed to do it. He saw me staring at a bank statement from 10 years ago until my eyes burned, and he simply sat down next to me with his laptop. If we are going to do this, he said, we are going to do it with a chain of custody, metadata, timestamps. If you ever have to show this to a lawyer or a judge, it cannot look like a scrapbook. It has to look like evidence. He set up the system. Every document I found, we scanned. We authenticated the creation dates. We extracted the header information from old emails to prove they hadn't been altered. We built a timeline that was impossible to refute. It was the most romantic thing anyone has ever done for me. The first loose thread I pulled was the college fund. Growing up, the narrative was always the same. We had a fund for you, Mila, my mother would say, usually while sighing and rubbing her temples. But you needed so much help. The tutoring, the extra courses, the time you crashed the car. We drained it just to keep you afloat. I believed her. I remembered struggling in math. I remembered the fender bender when I was 17. I assumed my incompetence was expensive. But then I found the bank records. I had to request archives going back 15 years. It cost me $60 and 3 notarized forms to get them. But when the PDF arrived, the story fell apart. The account, a custodial savings account under my name, had a balance of $42,000 in June of 2011. That was the summer before my sophomore year of college. The summer I was working 2 jobs because my mother told me there was no money left for tuition. On August 14th, 2011. The account was not drained by a series of small withdrawals for tutoring or car repairs. It was emptied in a single transaction. Transfer to account ending in 4982. I traced the account number. It belonged to a newly formed LLC called MK Consulting, Marianne Knight Consulting, 2 days after that transfer. On August 16, 2011. My mother posted a photo on Facebook. I found it in the archives. It was a picture of her standing in the driveway next to a brand new, pearl white SUV. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to treat yourself for all the hard work. Blessed new wheels." I looked at the price of the base model for that vehicle in 2011. It was $41,500. She hadn't spent the money on my failures. She had spent it on her leather seats. And then she had looked me in the eye for a decade and told me that I was the reason the money was gone. She made me feel guilty for a theft she committed. I saved the bank statement. I saved the Facebook photo. I saved the registration document for MK Consulting. I put them all in folder A. Then I moved to folder B, the taxes. This was less emotional and more criminal. I hired an independent CPA, a woman named Sarah who worked 2 towns over and had no connection to my family. I asked her to pull my transcript summaries from the IRS. I sat in her office, under the hum of fluorescent lights, while she frowned at her monitor. "Mila," she asked, "were you living at home in 2015? "No," I said. "I was 23. I was living in Denver. I had my own apartment." "Did your parents pay for more than 50% of your living expenses?" "They paid 0%, I said. "I was working as a junior analyst. I paid my own rent. I bought my own groceries." Sarah turned the screen toward me. "Well, according to these filings, your mother claimed you as a dependent in 2015 and 2016 and 2017. My blood ran cold. By claiming me as a dependent, Marianne got a tax break, but more importantly, she blocked me from claiming certain deductions for myself. But the real issue wasn't the few $1,000s in tax savings, it was the lie. She had signed a federal document swearing that she supported me, that I was a child in her care. At the exact same time, she was telling the relatives that I had abandoned the family and never called. She was monetizing my dependence while criticizing my independence. "This is fraud," Sarah said quietly. "If the IRS audits this, she is in trouble." "Print it," I said. "Print it all." But folder C was the one that broke me. Folder C was where the story stopped being about a greedy mother and started being about a family conspiracy. I decided to run a full, deep-dive credit report. Not the free one you get from your bank app, but the comprehensive one that lists every inquiry and open line of credit for the last 20 years. I found 5 credit cards I had never seen before. They were opened when I was 19 and 20, the years I was away at college, struggling to pay for textbooks. The limits on the cards were high $10,000, $15,000, and they were all maxed out, but they weren't in collections. They were being paid. The minimum monthly payment, every single month, like clockwork. That was why I never got a call. The debt was being serviced just enough to keep the alarm bells from ringing. I looked at the billing address for these cards. It wasn't my parents' house. It wasn't my dorm room. It was a P.O. box in Ithaca, New York. I stared at the zip code. 14850. I knew that zip code. My sister, Blair, went to college in Ithaca. She stayed there for 2 years after graduation to find herself while working part-time at an art gallery. Wyatt helped me request the transaction history for the cards. We had to jump through hoops, answering security questions that I only knew the answers to because they were about my own life. What is your mother's maiden name? What is the name of your first pet when the statement's downloaded? The screen filled with purchases. I do not buy designer handbags. I buy durable luggage. I do not spend $400 on a hair appointment. I cut my own ends. I do not run up tabs at nightclubs called Velvet or The Lounge. But Mila Knight did. The statements were a diary of Blair's 20s. The trips to the Hamptons, the endless Sephora hauls, the plane tickets to Miami. I saw a charge for a specific brand of high-end yoga gear on May 3rd, 2014. I went to Blair's Instagram. I scrolled back. May 5th, 2014. A photo of Blair in a yoga studio, wearing that exact outfit. Caption, investing in my wellness. She wasn't investing, I was, or rather, my credit score was. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just Marianne, it was Blair, or perhaps, it was Marianne doing it for Blair. I looked at the dates again. The cards were opened using my social security number. The bills were sent to Blair's vicinity. The payments were made from an account linked to my mother. They had built a financial ecosystem where I was the host, and they were the parasites. Marianne kept the debt in my name so that Blair could look successful. Blair got the good life without the debt-to-income ratio that would ruin her chance at a mortgage. I carried the weight so Blair could float, and because the minimum payments were made, they thought it was victimless. They thought I would never know. They thought that as long as they didn't default, they were just borrowing my identity. But they had stolen my capacity to be trusted. They had ruined my first apartment application. They had forced me to take high-interest loans because my score was artificially suppressed by their utilization rate. I sat in my living room in Lakewood, surrounded by these stacks of paper, and I finally understood the scope of it. This wasn't just bad parenting. This was an enterprise. A week before the reunion, before the email, before the invoice, I received a phone call from Grandma Nora. It was brief. Nora hates the telephone. She thinks it is an instrument for gossip. "Mila," she said. Her voice sounded like dry leaves scraping over concrete. "Hi, Grandma?" I said, surprised. "You are coming to the reunion." It wasn't a question. "I am planning on it." "Good," she said. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence where I could hear the clock ticking in her hallway. "Do not come empty-handed." "What?" I asked. "You mean bring a dish like a salad." "I do not need a salad, Mila," she snapped. "I have caterers for the salad. I mean, do not come empty-handed. If you walk into a lion's den, you do not bring an olive branch. You bring a spear." Then she hung up. I didn't understand her then. I thought she was being senile. I thought she was speaking in metaphors about standing up for myself emotionally. But looking at the stacks of paper on my desk, the tax fraud, the drained college fund, the identity theft to fund Blair's lifestyle, I realized she wasn't talking about metaphors. She knew. She had to know. She lived in the same town as them. She saw the new cars. She saw Blair's vacations. She knew the math didn't add up. But Nora was old school. She didn't intervene based on suspicion. She waited for proof. She was telling me to bring the proof. That was when the final piece clicked into place. Marianne's cost of raising a failure invoice wasn't just an act of cruelty. It was a preemptive strike. She knew I was getting older. She knew I was a risk analyst. She knew that eventually I might look, if she could paint me as a failure, as a financial disaster, as a daughter who drained the family resources, then if I ever came forward with these accusations, she could dismiss them. "Oh, don't listen to Mila." She would say, "She is just angry because we cut her off. She is drowning in debt and trying to blame us. Look at this invoice. Look at how much she cost us." She was destroying my credibility to protect her crimes. She was building a legal defense out of my humiliation. I closed the folder on my laptop. I looked at Wyatt. "We need to back up everything again," I said. "And we need to print hard copies. 3 sets." "Why 3? Wyatt asked. "One for me?" I said. "One for the lawyer we are going to hire eventually." I picked up the file labeled Consumer Credit. "And one for the reunion," I said, "because Grandma didn't ask for a salad." The drive to the Finger Lakes was a study in atmospheric pressure. As we crossed the state line into New York, the sky turned a heavy, slate gray, matching the churning water of the lake that anchored my grandmother's property. Nora Halstead's house was not a cabin. It was an estate disguised as a rustic retreat, a sprawling structure of cedar and stone that had sat on the western shore since the 1920s. It smelled of old wood, furniture polish, and the specific, damp chill of money that has been in the same bank account for 3 generations. We pulled into the long gravel driveway at 10 in the morning on Saturday. The lawn was already a parking lot of luxury sedans and rental cars. I saw my Uncle Robert's Audi. I saw the minivan belonging to my cousin Sarah. And right in the center, blocking the optimal exit path, was my mother's SUV, the one bought with my college fund. Wyatt turned off the engine. The silence in our rental car was heavy. "Game face," he said softly. He reached over and squeezed my hand. His grip was warm, a stark contrast to the cold knot in my stomach. "Game face," I repeated. We didn't even make it to the front porch before Marianne intercepted us. She swept out of the front door, wearing a floral apron over a dress that I knew cost more than my first car. She didn't hug me. She didn't ask how the flight was. She handed me a bag of ice. "Thank God you are here," she said, breathless with self-imposed martyrdom. "The caterers are useless. I need you to fill the coolers on the back deck, then check on the kids in the playroom. Sarah is overwhelmed, and I don't want them breaking Nora's vases." She looked at Wyatt, gave him a tight, dismissive nod, and turned back to me. "And Mila, try to keep your hair back. You look windblown. We are taking photos later." It was a masterclass in regression. In 10 seconds, she had stripped away my career, my marriage, and my autonomy. I wasn't Mila Knight, senior risk analyst. I was Mila, the help. I was the extra pair of hands that cost nothing to employ. "I'll take the ice," Wyatt said, reaching for the bag. "No," Marianne snapped, her smile fixed but her eyes hard. "Mila knows where they go. You go inside. Wyatt, Caleb is mixing drinks in the den. Go be with the men." I took the ice. I walked to the back deck. I filled the coolers. I went to the playroom and refereed a dispute between two toddlers over a plastic truck. I set the tables with the heavy silver cutlery that Nora only brought out for weddings and funerals. I folded napkins. I became invisible. An hour later, the gravel crunched again. This time, the arrival was a performance. My sister Blair stepped out of a hired town car. She was wearing a pale blue chiffon dress that caught the wind like a movie prop. She held a bottle of vintage wine in one hand and a designer clutch in the other. Marianne practically ran off the porch. "There she is," my mother cried out, her voice pitching up an octave. "Oh, look at you. Stunning, absolutely stunning." She embraced Blair as if my sister had just returned from a war zone, rather than a 2-hour drive from a spa hotel where she had stayed the night before to prepare. "I am so sorry I'm late," Blair said, handing the wine to my father, who had emerged to carry her single, small bag. "Traffic was a nightmare." "It doesn't matter," Marianne cooed. "You are here. The party can start." I was standing 10 feet away, holding a stack of dirty appetizer plates I had just cleared. Marianne didn't introduce me to the new guests. She didn't wave me over. She just pivoted her body slightly, creating a physical wall between the successful daughter and the one holding the trash. At noon, Marianne clapped her hands. "Photos? Everyone to the lawn by the lake. The light is perfect." This was the ritual I dreaded most, the Halstead family photo. It was a military operation. Marianne directed us like cattle. The elders, Nora. The great-aunts sat in chairs in the front. The cousins and spouses filled the middle. I moved to stand next to Wyatt, near the edge. "Mila, no," Marianne barked. She pointed to the very back row, behind Uncle Robert, who is 6'2". "You are too tall. You cast a shadow on Blair. Go to the back. Farther back." I stepped back. I was now partially obscured by a rhododendron bush. "Perfect," Marianne said. "Wyatt, you can crouch down next to Sarah's husband." "Good. Everyone smile. Say legacy." I didn't say legacy. I stared into the lens and thought about folder C. I thought about the credit card used to buy the dress Blair was wearing. I wondered if the photographer could see the invisible price tag hanging off her shoulder. As the group broke up, I felt a hand on my elbow. It was sharp, bony, and surprisingly strong. I looked down. Grandma Nora was standing beside me. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Marianne, who was busy checking the digital preview on the photographer's camera. "It is coming," Nora whispered. Her voice was low, a dry rustle. What is coming? I asked. She squeezed my elbow, hard. The storm. Don't you dare shake. Mila, if you shake, she wins. Then she tapped her cane on the grass and walked away. Moving toward the head of the long dining table set up under the white tent. Lunch was an endurance test. The food was excellent poached salmon, asparagus, risotto, but it tasted like ash. I sat at the far end of the table, near the children. Marianne sat at the center, flanked by Blair and the pastor. When the coffee was served, the speeches began. This was Marianne's favorite part. She loved the toast to the mothers, one by one. My cousins stood up and thanked their mothers. Then, it was Blair's turn. Blair stood up, holding her glass of Pinot Grigio. She looked dewy-eyed. To my mother, Blair said, her voice wobbling with practiced emotion. Marianne Knight, the woman who taught me that beauty is strength, the woman who sacrificed everything so we could have the world. You are my best friend. Mom, I don't know where I would be without you. Probably in debtor's prison, I muttered. Wyatt kicked me gently under the table. Marianne wiped a single, delicate tear from her cheek. She stood up. The table went quiet. 52 people turned their faces toward her. She glowed under their attention. She looked regal, composed, the matriarch in waiting. Thank you, she said. Her voice was warm, enveloping the room. Being a mother is the hardest job in the world. It is a thankless job. You pour your soul into your children. You give them your body, your time, your finances. She paused. She looked down at the tablecloth, then up, making eye contact with the room, but skipping over me. But not all investments yield the same return, she said, her tone shifting, the warmth evaporated, replaced by a cold, sorrowful gravity. We all know the story of the prodigal son, but nobody talks about the cost of the prodigal daughter, the one who takes and gives nothing back but heartache. The air in the tent changed. The clinking of silverware stopped. People shifted in their chairs. They knew she was pivoting. They knew this was the Mila portion of the program. Usually, she just made a vague comment about my struggles today. She went further. I have tried to be transparent, Marianne said. I have tried to be patient, but transparency requires truth. And the truth is, love is expensive. She reached into her purse, which was sitting on the table. She pulled out her phone. I decided this morning that I needed to clear the air, she said. I want this family to understand the burden we have been carrying. I just sent an email to all of you, to the family, to our dear friends here today. At that exact second, the sound began. It started with a single ding from a phone on the table, then a buzz from a pocket, then a chorus of chimes, vibrations, and alerts. It rippled down the long table like a wave. Ding, psst, ping, whoosh. 52 phones lit up simultaneously. Marianne smiled. It was the smile of an executioner who believes she is doing God's work. Open it, she urged. Please, I have nothing to hide. I watched my cousin Greg pick up his phone. I saw his eyebrows shoot up. I saw Aunt Sarah put on her reading glasses. What is this? Someone whispered. Cost of raising a failure. Marianne said loud and clear. She picked up a large object that had been resting against her chair leg. It was wrapped in brown paper. She tore the paper off. It was the frame. A large, ornate silver frame, holding the high-resolution print of the invoice. She held it up. She walked over to the stone fireplace of the outdoor pavilion, where the family portraits were displayed. She shoved a picture of me and Wyatt, a small 4x6 snap from our wedding, to the side, and placed the framed invoice in the center. $347,000, Marianne announced. She turned back to the crowd. That is the itemized cost of raising Mila. Every failed class, every bailout, every medical bill for her anxiety, every dollar I spent trying to fix something that was broken from the start. She looked at me then, for the first time all day, She gave me her full attention. "I don't expect you to pay it back, Mila," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried perfectly in the stunned silence. "I know you can't. You can't even pay your own rent without help. But I want you to look at it. I want you to see what you are worth. You are a deficit. You are a red line in this family's ledger." The silence that followed was absolute. A bird chirped in the distance, and it sounded like a scream. All eyes turned to me. They were waiting. They were waiting for the tears. They were waiting for me to run away, or to scream, or to drop to my knees and beg for forgiveness. That was the script. That was the role I had played for 33 years. Wyatt started to stand up. His face was thunder. He was going to shout. He was going to flip the table. I put a hand on his arm. I pushed him back down. I didn't stand up. I didn't look at the invoice on the mantel. I didn't look at Blair, who was smirking behind her wine glass. I looked at my phone. My hands were not shaking. Grandma Nora was watching me from the head of the table, her face unreadable, her hands resting on her cane. I unlocked my screen. I navigated to the file manager. I opened the folder named Ledger. Inside, the files were waiting, the PDFs, the timestamps, the bank transfers, the credit reports. "Mila," Marianne said, goading me. "Do you have nothing to say? No apology?" I looked up at her. I didn't smile. Risk analysts don't smile when they find a discrepancy. They just highlight it. "I have an invoice too," I said, and then, while the entire family watched, I tapped the screen. The silence in the pavilion was absolute. It was the kind of vacuum that exists right before a structure collapses. Marianne stood by the fireplace, one hand resting on the silver frame that displayed my alleged debt, her chest heaving slightly with the exertion of her performance. She was waiting for the applause. She was waiting for the nods of agreement from the aunts and uncles who had spent decades listening to her stories about how difficult I was. She expected me to break. She expected the Mila of 10 years ago, the 23-year-old girl who cried in the bathroom because she couldn't afford a plane ticket home. But I was not 23. I was 33, and I was not a daughter anymore. I was an auditor. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I simply cleared my throat. It was a small sound, but in that breathless quiet, it sounded like a gavel striking a desk. "If today is the day we are sharing numbers," I said, my voice flat and devoid of any tremor, "then I think it is only fair that I share some numbers of my own." Marianne blinked. "Excuse me?" I said, "I have my own invoice." I replied. I looked down at my phone. My thumb hovered over the reply all button. The email draft was already prepared. The attachment was loaded. It was a single image from Folder A, the bank transfer record from August 14th, 2011. I pressed the button. "Sent," I said. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The wind rustled the edges of the white tent. A boat engine hummed in the distance on the lake. Then, the sound began. Ping. My Uncle Robert's phone, sitting on the table next to his wine glass, lit up. Buzz. My cousin Sarah reached into her purse. Then came the cascade. A ripple of digital chimes and vibrations swept through the 52 guests like a contagion. It was a chorus of notifications, a synchronized alert that signaled the arrival of a new piece of evidence. "What is this?" Aunt Linda asked. Squinting at her screen, she adjusted her glasses. "Mila just replied to the email. I didn't write a letter." "Aunt Linda," I said, staying seated, "I just sent a picture. You might want to zoom in on the routing number." Marianne's smile faltered. It didn't disappear, but it froze, losing its warmth. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her own phone. I watched her eyes scan the screen. I watched the exact moment the blood drained from her face, leaving her complexion the color of old parchment. "This is—" She started to speak, but her voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again, louder this time. "This is nonsense. What are you trying to do? Mila Photoshop. It is a PDF export from the bank's archival system." "Mother," I said, "look at the date. August 14th, 2011. Uncle Robert was the first one to understand. He was a CPA. He didn't look at the picture as a family memento. He looked at it as a transaction. He picked up his phone and held it closer to his face. $42,000, Robert read aloud. His voice was puzzled. Transfer from custodial account ending in 334 to an external business account. That was my college fund, I said. I spoke to the room, not to Marianne. The fund that Mom told everyone was empty because I needed tutoring. The fund she said was drained because I was such an expensive child. It was spent on you, Marianne shouted. She took a step forward, her hand gripping the edge of the table. You have no idea what it costs to maintain a household. That money went to your expenses, your clothes, your car insurance. No, I said. It didn't. I tapped my screen again. I just sent the second file, I announced. Another wave of chimes. Ping, ping, ping. This is the transaction detail, I narrated, acting as if I were presenting a quarterly risk assessment to a board of directors. As you can see, the $42,000 was withdrawn in a lump sum. It was wired directly to an account held by MK Consulting LLC. I looked at my cousin Greg. Greg, do you remember when Aunt Marianne started her consulting business, the one that never really had any clients? Greg looked up from his phone, his eyes wide. She bought the SUV that year. The white Lexus. Exactly, I said. August 16th, 2011. 2 days after the transfer. The wire amount matches the down payment and the first year of lease payments for a luxury vehicle. My college tuition didn't go to the University of Colorado. It went to the Lexus dealership in Syracuse. The atmosphere in the tent shifted violently. Before this moment, the guests had been spectators at a disciplinary hearing where I was the accused. Now, they were witnesses to a crime scene. Marianne realized she was losing the room. She abandoned the failed daughter narrative and switched to the ignorant child defense. You do not understand finances. Mila, she cried out, her voice pitching into hysteria. I moved that money to manage it better. It was a family decision. I used it to support the family infrastructure, so you girls could have a home to come back to. It is all the same pot of money. It is not the same pot, I cut her off. One pot is a custodial account legally designated for education. The other pot is a limited liability company used to purchase personal assets. It is all for you, she screamed. Everything I do is for you. Then explain the loans. A deep voice rumbled from the side of the table. Everyone turned. It was Uncle Robert. He had put his phone down. He was looking at Marianne with a terrifyingly blank expression. Marianne, Robert said slowly, if you had $42,000 in a liquid account in August of 2011, why did you ask me to help Mila fill out the FAFSA forms that September? Why did you make her sign for student loans at 6.8% interest? It was the kill shot. The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. If the money was for the family, why was the debt solely mine? If the money was managed, why was I paying interest on loans I shouldn't have needed? Marianne opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked at Robert, then at Blair, then at the silent, staring faces of her friends and neighbors. She looked at the pastor, who was suddenly very interested in the pattern of the tablecloth. Marianne stammered. We had cash flow issues. You don't know the whole story. I think the ledger tells the story pretty clearly, I said. My father, Caleb, stood up. He had been sitting next to Blair, shrinking into his suit as if he hoped to disappear. Caleb Knight was a man who had made a career out of not asking questions. He let Marianne drive the car. He let Marianne balance the checkbook. He let Marianne decide which daughter was the good one, but $42,000 was a number even he couldn't ignore. Marianne, he said. His voice was weak, shaking like a leaf in a storm. She whipped her head toward him. Don't you start. Caleb, don't you dare. You know how hard I work. Did you buy the car with the girls' money? He asked. It was the first time in my life I had heard him ask her a direct question about finances. I bought the car so I could drive them around, she deflected. I needed a safe vehicle. Mila was in college, Caleb said. blinking rapidly. She wasn't in the car. She was in Colorado. Marianne looked at him with pure venom. Oh, so now you are the expert. Now you are the protective father. Where were you when I was balancing the accounts at midnight? Where were you when I was making sure we looked like a respectable family? We don't look respectable right now, Caleb whispered. He sat back down, burying his face in his hands. I looked at Blair. My sister was sitting perfectly still. She hadn't checked her phone. She was staring at me. Her glass of wine was halfway to her mouth, frozen in midair. For years, Blair had looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. She saw me as the mess she had to tolerate. But in that moment, the look changed. It wasn't pity anymore. It was fear. She looked at Wyatt, who was sitting next to me with his arms crossed, looking like a bodyguard who had just watched his client dismantle an attacker. Then she looked back at me. She realized that the dynamic had inverted. The failure had the receipts, and if I had receipts for the college fund, what else did I have? She knew what else I had. I could see the panic rising in her throat. She knew about the credit cards. She knew about the shopping trips. Marianne was panting now, looking for an exit, looking for a way to regain control. She grabbed the silver frame from the mantelpiece, the cost of raising a failure invoice. "This is ungrateful," she shouted, waving the frame like a shield. I calculated every penny. $347,000. You are quibbling over a car after everything I gave you. I am not quibbling. Mother, I said calmly, I am auditing. I stood up then. It was time to leave. I had done what I came to do. I had pierced the veil. I had turned the audience into a jury. I am not done, I said, my voice carrying over the wind and the stunned silence. That was just the contents of folder A. Marianne froze. What? I have 2 more folders, I said. Folder B is about the IRS, and folder C. I let my gaze drift to Blair, holding her eyes until she flinched. Folder C is about identity. I picked up my purse. I looked at Grandma Nora. She hadn't moved a muscle. She was sitting at the head of the table, her hands clasped over her cane, watching Marianne with an expression of profound, terrifying judgment. She gave me the smallest of nods. You might want to check your email spam folder later, I said to the group. The next files are large, and the last one isn't just about money. It is about who you pretend to be when you think no one is watching. I turned to Wyatt. Let's go. We walked out of the tent. We walked past the stunned relatives, past the cooling salmon, past the silver frame that now looked less like a trophy and more like a tombstone. Behind me, I heard Marianne start to scream, a high, desperate sound of a director whose actors had gone rogue. Don't you walk away from me, Mila. Get back here. You are ruining this family. But I wasn't ruining the family. I was just turning on the lights. And the thing about turning on the lights in a cellar is that you finally see what has been scurrying around in the dark. We got into the rental car. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of execution. Folder B, Wyatt asked, as he put the car in reverse. Folder B, I confirmed. But not yet. Let them sit with the car for a few hours. Let them do the math. As we drove down the driveway, I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw the white tent. I saw the figures standing motionless inside it. And I saw my mother, standing alone by the fireplace, holding her frame, while 52 people looked at their phones and realized they had been clapping for a thief. We did not make it past the county line. I had intended to drive straight back to the airport, to leave them in the wreckage of their own denial, but my phone rang before we hit the main road. It was not my mother. It was my father, Caleb. His voice was not the whisper I was used to. It was tight, panicked, and sounded like a man who was watching his house burn down from the inside. Come back, he said. Please. She is telling everyone you forged the bank statements. She is telling Robert that you are trying to blackmail the family. You have to come back and finish it. I looked at Wyatt. He didn't say a word. He just turned the car around. We weren't going back to apologize. We were going back to deliver the rest of the mail. When we walked into the great room of Nora's lake house, the atmosphere was thick enough to choke on. The family had migrated from the tent to the living room. Marianne was seated in the center of the beige sectional sofa, weeping into a handkerchief, flanked by my aunts who were patting her back. Blair was standing by the window, looking pale, holding a glass of water with both hands. Grandma Nora sat in her high-backed armchair by the fireplace, her cane resting against her knee. She looked like a judge presiding over a chaotic courtroom. When I entered, the room went silent. "She's back," Aunt Sarah whispered. "The ungrateful girl is back." "I am not here to argue," I said. Cutting through the murmur, I remained standing. I wanted to be ready to leave. "I am here because you accused me of forgery, and since we are concerned with the authenticity of documents, let's open folder B." I signaled to Wyatt. He opened his iPad. We had connected it to the house's AirPlay system earlier, ostensibly to show a slideshow of old family photos. Now, the 60-inch television above the fireplace flickered to life. "This," I said, pointing to the screen, "is a summary of Marianne Knight's tax filings for the years 2014 through 2018. The screen displayed a grid. Red boxes highlighted specific lines on the 1040 forms. "In 2014, I was 23, I said. "I was living in Denver. I paid my own rent. I paid for my own health insurance. I filed my own taxes as a single, independent filer." I swiped the screen. "But here is Marianne's filing for the same year. Line 6C, dependents." A gasp went through the room. There, typed clearly in black and white, was my name, my social security number, relationship daughter. "She claimed me," I said, my voice cold. "She claimed me as a dependent for 4 years after I moved out. She took the education credits. She took the personal exemptions. She told the federal government that she was providing more than 50% of my financial support at the exact same time she was telling all of you that I had abandoned her." Uncle Robert stood up. He walked closer to the television. He took off his glasses and leaned in. "Marianne," Robert said, his voice dropping to a dangerous baritone, "is this real? Did you file these—" "I was helping her," Marianne sobbed, dabbing her eyes frantically. "She was struggling. I put the money aside for her. It was a strategy." "It is not a strategy, Marianne," Robert snapped. "It is tax fraud. You cannot claim an adult child who provides their own support. If the IRS sees this, the penalties alone will wipe out your retirement accounts. And here is the kicker," I continued. "Because she claimed me. My own returns were flagged. I lost refunds. I spent $3,000 on an accountant to untangle the mess she made. I spent hours on the phone with the IRS proving that I existed as a separate entity." I tapped the screen again. A new document appeared. It was an invoice I had drafted myself. "This is my reverse invoice," I said. $3,000 in accounting fees, $4,000 in lost refunds, $2,000 in interest penalties. If we are itemizing the cost of a relationship, Mother, you owe me $9,000 just for the privilege of filing my taxes." Marianne wailed. "How can you be so cold? I am your mother." "You are not a mother right now," I said. "You are a liability." I looked at Blair. She was staring at the floor, refusing to make eye contact. She thought she was safe. She thought the tax fraud was Marianne's sin, not hers. "And now?" I said. "Folder C." The screen changed. The tax forms disappeared, replaced by a credit report. It was a chaotic spiderweb of high-interest debt. 5 credit cards, I announced, opened between 2012 and 2015, all under the name Mila Knight, all maxed out. Total liability, $58,000. "We know you have debt, Mila," Aunt Sarah scoffed. "Your mother told us. That is why she had to help you." "Look at the billing address," I said. Wyatt zoomed in on the image. 124 Cayuga Street, Ithaca, New York. "I have never lived in Ithaca," I said. "I have never even visited Ithaca, but someone in this room lived there for 3 years after college." Every head turned toward the window. Toward Blair. Blair flinched. The water in her glass splashed over the rim, staining her expensive silk dress. "I don't know what you are talking about," Blair stammered. Her voice was thin, reedy. "That must be a mistake. Maybe Mom used my address because you were moving around so much." "Nice try," I said. "But credit card companies track more than just billing addresses. They track shipping addresses for purchases." I swiped the screen again. This was the smoking gun. It was a series of delivery confirmations from a luxury department store. Item Chanel Classic Flat Bag. Price $5,600. Date November 12, 2013. Shipped to Blair Knight, 124 Cayuga Street. Below the address was a digital capture of the signature at delivery. It was a loop, a distinctive, flamboyant B, Knight with a heart over the I. "That is not my signature," I said. "That is Blair's." Blair's husband, Grant, was sitting on the arm of the sofa. He was a quiet man, a commercial real estate agent who liked golf and avoided conflict, but he was staring at the screen with a look of dawning horror. "Blair," Grant said slowly, "November 2013. That was right before we got engaged." "It doesn't mean anything," Blair cried, her face flushing a deep, blotchy red. "I didn't order that. Maybe Mom ordered it and sent it to me." "With a credit card in Mila's name?" Grant asked. "A card Mila didn't know about." "I didn't know," Blair shouted. She looked at Marianne, eyes wide with panic. "Mom told me she was handling it. She said she had a line of credit for the family. She said it was part of my trust fund." "You didn't know?" I asked softly. "Or you didn't want to know?" I looked at Wyatt. He tapped the iPad. A split screen appeared. On the left was the signature from the delivery receipt. On the right was a scanned image of the thank you card Blair had sent us for our wedding. The signatures were identical. The loop, the slant, the heart. "You signed for the stolen goods. Blair," I said. "You accepted packages worth thousands of dollars that you knew you didn't pay for. You knew Mom didn't have that kind of money. You knew I was eating ramen noodles in Denver. And you didn't ask a single question." "Grant, please," Blair begged, reaching for her husband's arm. "I was 24. I was stupid. Mom said it was fine." Grant pulled his arm away. He stood up. He looked at his wife as if she were a stranger he had just met in a police lineup. "The golf clubs," Grant said. His voice was hollow. "The custom Callaway set you gave me for my 30th birthday. You said you saved for 6 months." I watched Wyatt's fingers fly across the iPad. He was searching the transaction database we had compiled. "June 2014, Wyatt asked. Grant nodded. "Here it is," Wyatt said. "Sporting Goods Direct, $2,400. Card ending in 558, Mila Knight." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Grant looked at the watch on his wrist, then at his shoes. He looked at the woman he had married, the woman who presented herself as the epitome of grace and success. "You bought my birthday present with your sister's stolen identity," Grant whispered. It wasn't a question. "I didn't know it was Mila's," Blair screamed, finally cracking. "I just knew Mom gave me the card number. I didn't look at the name. I just wanted things to be nice." "You wanted things to be nice," I repeated. "And you didn't care who paid for the view." Marianne stood up then. She realized the room had turned. She realized that the Mila is a failure narrative had dissolved, replaced by a much uglier story titled, "Marianne and Blair Are Thieves." She switched tactics instantly. The tears stopped. Her face hardened into a mask of righteous indignation. "Stop it," she commanded. "All of you, just stop. You are tearing this family apart over numbers, over money. Money is just paper. Family is everything." She walked over to Blair and put an arm around her, glaring at me. "Yes, I used Mila's credit," Marianne declared, lifting her chin. "I had to. Your father's business was slow. We had bills. We had appearances to keep up. Blair needed to meet the right people. She needed a wardrobe. She needed a life. I did what a mother does. I distributed the load." "You didn't distribute the load," I said. You crushed one child to build a pedestal for the other. I intended to pay it back, Marianne shouted. Eventually, if you hadn't run off, if you had stayed and helped us instead of being so selfish, maybe we could have balanced the books. But no, you had to be independent. You had to be the victim. And there it is, Uncle Robert said quietly. He looked at Marianne with a mixture of pity and disgust. You committed identity theft against your own daughter, Robert said. And you are standing here justifying it because you wanted Blair to marry a rich husband. I did it for the family, Marianne shrieked. For the legacy. The legacy, Grandma Nora said. We had all forgotten she was there. She had been sitting so still in her armchair that she had blended into the shadows. Now, she leaned forward. The firelight caught the silver handle of her cane. You talk a lot about my legacy, Marianne, Nora said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a razor wire. You spend my money. You use my house. You drop my name at the country club. Nora slowly stood up. She was 82 years old, but in that moment, she looked 10 feet tall. I have listened to you call Mila a failure for 20 years, Nora continued. I have watched you treat her like a servant, and I stayed quiet because I thought, perhaps you were just a hard mother. Perhaps you were just strict. She walked over to the television. She looked at the signature on the screen, the evidence of her granddaughter's betrayal. But you are not strict, Nora said. You are a criminal, and you have made my other granddaughter into an accomplice. Marianne's face crumpled. Mother, please, it is complicated. It is not complicated, Nora said. It is arithmetic, and unlike you, Marianne, I do not believe in creative accounting. The room was suspended in a state of shock. Blair was sobbing silently. Grant was staring out the window, his back to his wife. Caleb was still sitting with his head in his hands, but the final twist hadn't landed yet. Mila, I said, addressing myself, or perhaps the ghost of the girl I used to be. Show them the last document in folder C, the one from the pandemic. Wyatt hesitated. Are you sure? Show it, I said. They need to see how deep the rot goes. Because the credit cards were bad. The tax fraud was illegal. But what came next? What came next was the reason I knew Marianne would never stop unless she was forced to. It wasn't just greed. It was a complete erasure of my existence as a human being, reducing me to nothing more than a host for her parasitic ambition. There is one last file, I said. The room was already suffocating, thick with the debris of a shattered family image. But this felt different. The credit cards were theft. The tax fraud was greed. But what I was about to show them wasn't just a crime against me. It was a federal felony. It was the kind of thing that doesn't just ruin a reputation. It puts people in handcuffs. We are done, Mila, Marianne snapped. Her voice was brittle, cracking at the edges. She was hugging her elbows, standing defensively by the fireplace. You have made your point. You have embarrassed us. Leave. I can't leave yet, I said. Because if I walk out that door now, you still have the insurance policy. What insurance policy? Uncle Robert asked. He had sunk back into the sofa, looking 10 years older than he had that morning. The narrative, I said. The story that I am a disaster. The story that I am financially unstable. Marianne didn't just write that story to hurt my feelings. She wrote it to protect herself from prison. I nodded to Wyatt. He tapped the iPad one last time. The screen shifted. The logo of the Small Business Administration appeared. May of 2020, I began. The world was shutting down. I was in Colorado, working remotely, worried about my husband's job, worried about my grocery bills. I didn't leave my house for 3 months. I pointed to the document displayed on the TV. But according to the United States government, I was very busy. On May 18th, 2020, a sole proprietorship operating under the name Mila Knight Creative Solutions applied for an economic injury disaster loan. A murmur went through the room. Everyone knew what those loans were. During the pandemic, the money had flowed like water, and apparently, My mother had brought a bucket. "I have never owned a business called Mila Knight Creative Solutions," I said. "I have never applied for an SBA loan, but this application claims I had gross revenues of $200,000 in 2019. "How much was the loan?" Grant asked. His voice was dull, resigned. $149,900, I said. Just under the threshold that required extra collateral review at the time. It was calculated. It was precise. I swiped to the next slide. "And here is the disbursement." The money hit a bank account opened online using my social security number. It sat there for exactly 3 days. Then, it moved. Wyatt brought up the flow chart we had built. It was a visual map of money laundering. It went from the fake Mila account to a holding company called Finger Lakes Management, I explained. And from there, it was used to pay off a commercial line of credit. I looked at Marianne. She wasn't looking at the screen. She was staring at me with a look I had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't disdain. It was the feral, terrifying look of a cornered animal realizing the cage door is locked. "Whose line of credit was it?" Robert asked. "Marianne Knight Consulting," I said. "The loan paid off the debt she incurred to renovate the kitchen we are standing in right now." I looked around the room. The granite countertops, the high-end appliances, the custom cabinetry. "You are drinking wine in a kitchen paid for by fraud committed in my name," I told the family. "This is ridiculous," Marianne hissed. Her voice was low, dangerous. "You applied for that loan. Mila, you probably forgot. You were so stressed during the pandemic. You asked me to help you manage it because you were overwhelmed." "I knew you would say that," I said. "That is why we pulled the metadata." Wyatt zoomed in on the signature block of the loan application. "This was signed via DocuSign," I said. "Electronic signatures leave a digital footprint. To sign this document, you need to access a specific email address and verify your identity with a 2-factor authentication code sent to a mobile phone." The screen displayed the log. IP address, 74.112, geolocation Syracuse, New York. "I was in Colorado," I reminded them, "but the IP address is here." Recovery email. "Marianne, Knight, business@gmail.com. "And the phone number," I said, pointing to the last piece of data. The verification code was sent to a mobile number ending in 8842. I turned to my father. "Dad," I said gently, "what is the last 4 digits of the family landline, the one that forwards to Mom's cell when she is out?" Caleb looked up. His face was gray. 8842. "She signed it," I said. "She used the family phone to impersonate me, steal $150,000 from the federal government, and funnel it into her own assets." The room was silent. This wasn't family drama anymore. This was the kind of secret that gets people indicted. Grandma Nora was watching me. Her expression hadn't changed, but there was a stillness to her that felt heavy. She wasn't surprised. That was the most chilling part. She sat there, her hands clasped over the silver head of her cane, waiting. She was waiting to see if I understood the why. Marianne took a step toward me. "You stop this," she said. It wasn't a request. It was a threat. "You do not know what you are doing, Mila. You are poking at things you do not understand. You are going to bring this whole house down. I am not the one who took the loan." "Mother," I said. "You think you are so smart with your spreadsheets," Marianne spat. "You think you are the victim I kept this family afloat. I did what I had to do." "By making me a criminal?" I asked. "By using an asset," she screamed. "You weren't using your credit. You weren't using your name. You were just sitting there in Colorado being mediocre. I put it to work." "And what happens when the SBA audits the loan?" I asked. "Because they are auditing them now. The grace period is over. They are looking for fraud." Marianne smiled. It was a gruesome, twisted thing. "If they audit," she said softly, "they will find a loan taken out by Mila Knight. They will find a daughter who has a history of financial instability. A daughter whose own mother had to send her an invoice for $300,000 just to show how much of a burden she was. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The air left my lungs. I looked at the framed invoice on the mantelpiece. Cost of raising a failure. I had thought it was just cruelty. I had thought it was just narcissism. I had thought she wanted to humiliate me because she hated me. I was wrong. It was so much worse than hate. It was preparation. "That is it, isn't it?" I whispered. The horror of it made my voice tremble. The invoice, the email to the 52 people, the constant stories about how I am a mess, how I am bad with money, how I am a failure. I looked at the family. She wasn't just venting, I said, my voice rising. She was building a dossier. She was planting witnesses. I turned back to Marianne. "You needed everyone to believe I was a failure," I said, "so that when the federal agents come knocking about the fraud you committed, you could point at me and say, 'Look, she is a disaster. She stole my identity. She stole the money. I am just the poor mother who tried to help her.'" Marianne didn't deny it. She didn't flinch. She just stood there, breathing hard, her eyes cold and hard as flint. "You are my daughter," she said. "You are supposed to help the family." "I am not your daughter," I said. "I am your scapegoat." I looked at Uncle Robert. He looked sick. He realized it too. He realized that every time Marianne had sighed and complained about poor chaotic Mila over the last 3 years, she wasn't looking for sympathy. She was preloading the jury pool. "She set me up," I told them. "She stole my identity, committed wire fraud, and then spent 3 years destroying my reputation so that no one would believe me when I told the truth." The silence that followed was total. It was the silence of a bomb that has finished ticking and is just taking that split second of breath before it detonates. Marianne looked around the room. She saw the faces of her friends, her family. She saw the disgust. She saw the fear. She saw that her carefully constructed stage had collapsed. "You ungrateful little bee," she started, stepping toward me with her hand raised. Wyatt stepped in front of me, his chest a solid wall. But he didn't have to do anything. "Sit down." "Marianne," the voice came from the armchair. It wasn't loud, but it stopped Marianne mid-step. Grandma Nora stood up. She didn't use her cane. She stood up straight, her spine stiff with 80 years of iron will. She looked at Marianne, her only daughter, with eyes that held no love, no pity, only a terrible, finalized clarity. "Mother," Marianne said, her voice shaking, "you know I did this for the estate, for the house." "Do not speak my name," Nora said. Nora walked to the center of the room. She stood between me and Marianne. She looked at the iPad screen, at the evidence of the loan, at the signature. Then she looked at the cost of raising a failure invoice on the mantel. She reached out and knocked the frame face down. The glass shattered. The sound was sharp and final. "I have watched you all your life," Nora said to Marianne. "I saw you take the best pieces of cake. I saw you pinch your sister when you thought I wasn't looking. I saw you lie about small things." Nora paused. "I thought you were just selfish," she said. "I did not know you were a monster." "I am not a monster," Marianne cried. "I am a mother." "No," Nora said. "A mother gives life. You have spent 30 years trying to consume your child's life to feed your own vanity." Nora looked at me. Her eyes softened. Just for a fraction of a second. It was the only apology I would get. And it was enough. Then she turned back to Marianne. "The show is over," Nora said. "The guests will leave. The family will go home." "And then what?" Marianne challenged, though her voice was trembling. "You going to ground me?" Nora looked at the grandfather clock in the corner. "Tonight is for silence," Nora said. "Tonight, you will sit in this house and you will look at what you have done." She gripped her cane, her knuckles white. "But tomorrow," Nora said, her voice dropping to a whisper that echoed off the high beams of the ceiling. "Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. You will understand the difference between a debt and a sentence." She looked straight into Marianne's eyes. "You sent Mila a bill she couldn't pay." Nora said, "So tomorrow, I am going to serve you a bill that cannot be paid with money, and certainly not with your tears." Nora turned to me. "Go," she said. "Take your husband. Go to the hotel. Do not answer your phone tonight." "Grandma," I started. "Go," she commanded. "This part of the work is not for you. You brought the ledger. Now let me balance the books." I looked at Marianne one last time. She looked small. She looked terrified. For the first time in my life. She didn't look like a giant. She looked like a fraud who had just realized that the auditor was not her daughter. The auditor was her mother. I took Wyatt's hand. We walked out of the house, leaving the shattered glass on the hearth and the ruins of my mother's reputation hanging in the air like smoke. The morning air at the lake was crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. I arrived at my grandmother's house at exactly 9 o'clock. The gravel driveway, which yesterday had been a parking lot for a chaotic family reunion, was now empty save for a single black sedan parked near the garage. Wyatt had dropped me off at the gate. We had agreed that he would wait at a small coffee shop about a mile down the road. This meeting was not for spouses. It was not for support systems. It was a summons, and when Nora Halstead summoned you, you stood alone. I walked up the porch steps. The shattered glass from the picture frame had been swept away, leaving the slate clean. I knocked on the heavy oak door. It opened immediately, not by a housekeeper, but by Nora herself. She was dressed in a charcoal wool suit, her silver hair pulled back into a severe, elegant knot. She did not look like a woman who had just discovered her daughter was a criminal. She looked like a general surveying a battlefield the morning after a victory. "You are on time," she said. It was the highest compliment she could give. "Come to the study." I followed her down the hallway. The house felt different today. Yesterday, it had been filled with the noise of 50 people pretending to be happy. Today, the silence was heavy, like the air inside a vault. We entered her study. It was a room I had rarely been allowed in as a child, a sanctuary of mahogany bookshelves, leather chairs, and the smell of old paper and ink. 2 men were waiting for us. I recognized one of them instantly, Gideon Hart. He had been the family attorney for 40 years, a man who spoke in paragraphs and smiled only on national holidays. He stood up as I entered, buttoning his suit jacket. The other man was younger, wearing wire-rimmed glasses and looking at a laptop screen with the intensity of a surgeon. "Mila," Gideon said, nodding his head. "Please, take a seat." I sat in the leather wingback chair facing the massive desk. Nora walked around the desk and took her seat at the head. She did not offer tea. She did not ask how I slept. "You are wondering why I am the only one who did not block your mother yesterday," Nora said. Her voice was steady, devoid of the tremor that often affects the elderly. "I assumed you wanted to keep lines of communication open," I said carefully. Nora laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Communication is for people who want to resolve conflict. Mila, I do not want to resolve this. I want to conclude it. Blocking someone is a passive act. It is a way of saying, I want peace. I do not want peace. I want order." She placed her hand on a stack of documents sitting in the center of the desk. "This is Gideon," she said, gesturing to the lawyer. "And this is Mr. Vance. Mr. Vance is a forensic accountant. He has been working since 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon, analyzing the files you sent." I looked at Mr. Vance. He gave me a brief, grim nod. "Your data was excellent. Miss Knight," Mr. Vance said. "The chain of custody on the bank transfers made my job very easy." "Mila," Nora said, drawing my attention back to her. For a long time, I suspected that Marianne was creative with the truth. I knew she was vain. I knew she was greedy. But suspicion is not evidence, and without evidence, accusation is just gossip. She leaned forward. I could not move against her because I did not know the extent of the rot. I thought she was just living beyond her means. I did not know she was cannibalizing her own children to do it. Your email provided the missing piece. She pushed a thick document across the desk toward me. It was bound in blue legal paper. This is the Third Amendment to the Halstead Family Trust, Nora said. Gideon drafted it last night. I signed it this morning. I opened the document. The legal language was dense, but I knew enough to understand the numbers. I cannot disinherit her completely, Nora explained calmly. If I cut her out entirely, she will sue the estate claiming undue influence or senility. She will tie up the assets in court for years, and the lawyers will eat everything. So, we have left her exactly enough. Enough for what? I asked. Enough to make it dangerous for her to challenge the will, Gideon interjected. It is a standard no-contest clause, but with a specific calculation, she will receive a stipend. It is a fixed amount, barely above the poverty line. Designed to keep her fed but not comfortable, if she contests any part of this trust, or if she attempts to act as a trustee, she loses even that. She goes to zero. She is removed as executor, Nora added. She is removed as power of attorney. She has no authority over this house, no authority over my medical decisions, and absolutely no access to the principal capital. I looked at the document. It was a surgical removal of power. Marianne had spent her life waiting for this inheritance. She had tolerated Nora, flattered her, and played the dutiful daughter solely for the moment when the check would clear. Nora hadn't just cut the money. She had put Marianne in a cage where she had to behave perfectly just to survive. But that is just the money, Nora said. Money can be recovered, trust cannot. She reached into a drawer in her desk. She pulled out an envelope. It was yellowed with age. The corners slightly bent. It had my name written on it in Nora's distinct, spidery handwriting. Do you remember your college graduation? Nora asked. Yes, I said. You didn't come. Mom said you were feeling under the weather. I was not under the weather, Nora said. Her eyes flashed with a cold fire. I was told by your mother that you did not want me there. She told me that you were embarrassed by the family, that you wanted to celebrate with your friends, and that having an old woman there would cramp your style. My chest tightened. I never said that. I looked for you in the crowd. I cried when I didn't see you. I know that now, Nora said softly. I sent this to you a week after you graduated. I gave it to Marianne to deliver because she said she was visiting you in Denver. She slid the envelope across the desk. She brought it back to me 2 weeks later, Nora said. She told me you refused to open it. She said you threw it on the table and said you didn't need charity from a grandmother who didn't love you. I stared at the envelope. My hands shook as I picked it up. The seal was still broken, likely from when Marianne had opened it to check for cash. I pulled out the letter inside. A check fluttered out. It was dated May 2012. The amount was $10,000, but it was the letter that made my throat close up. My dearest Mila, I am sorry I could not be there to see you walk across the stage. I am so proud of the woman you are becoming. You have a quiet strength, a way of observing the world that is rare in this family. We are loud people, Mila. We shout to be heard. You listen to understand. Do not let the noise of this family drown out your own voice. You are the only one of them who has ever looked at me and seen a person, not a bank vault. Use this money to start your life. Buy a good coat. Travel. Be free. Love. Grandma. I read the words through a blur of tears. For 13 years, I had believed Nora was cold. I believed she favored Blair. I believed she saw me as a disappointment, and for 13 years. Nora had believed I was a spoiled, ungrateful brat who rejected her gift. Marianne had triangulated us. She had severed the connection between the two people who might have actually understood each other, keeping us apart so she could control us both. She stole 13 years from us, I whispered. Yes, Nora said, and she spent that money. The check was never cashed, but I noticed withdrawals from my petty cash account around that time. I assumed I had miscounted. I was wrong. Nora waited for me to wipe my eyes. She gave me a moment to compose myself. Then, the steel returned to her spine. The emotional damage is done. Mila, we cannot get those years back, but we can ensure she does not damage anything else. She placed a third document on the desk. This one was not a trust. It was a formal complaint. Mr. Vance found something interesting while looking at the SBA loan you uncovered, Nora said. When Marianne applied for that fraudulent loan in your name, she listed collateral. Do you know what collateral she listed? I shook my head. She listed a 20% stake in this property. Nora said. My breath caught in my throat. She doesn't own this property. No, Nora said. She does not, but she forged a deed transfer. She created a document claiming I had gifted her a portion of the estate in 2019. Nora looked at Gideon. Mr. Hart has prepared a submission for the district attorney's office. Nora said, This is not a civil lawsuit. Mila, this is a criminal referral. Forgery, wire fraud, elder abuse. I looked at the document. State of New York versus Marianne Knight. You are going to send her to prison? I asked. The reality of it was staggering. Yesterday, I wanted revenge. Today, looking at the paperwork, I realized I was looking at the destruction of a life. I am not sending her anywhere, Nora said. She sent herself. I am simply delivering the mail. Nora stood up. She walked over to the window and looked out at the lake. I am 82 years old. Mila, I do not have time for rehabilitation. I do not have time for forgiveness. I have a responsibility to protect what remains of this family's name. Even if it means cutting off a limb to save the body, she turned back to me. The morning light caught the sharp angles of her face. Yesterday, you showed everyone the cost of raising a failure, Nora said. Marianne thought she could put a price tag on a human being. She thought she could quantify your worth and find you lacking. Nora walked back to the desk and picked up the criminal complaint. So today, I am going to show her the cost of betraying a matriarch. She handed the document to Gideon. File it, she said. Today, before noon. Gideon nodded and placed the file in his briefcase. The click of the latches closing sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Now, Nora said to me, you can go back to your husband, go back to Colorado, build your life. You have the ledger now. Mila, you know the truth. You do not need me to tell you who you are. What are you going to do? I asked. I am going to wait. Nora said, Marianne is coming here in an hour. She thinks she is coming to apologize. She thinks she can cry and talk her way out of this like she always has. Nora sat back in her chair, her hands folding over the silver head of her cane. She does not know that Gideon has already called the sheriff to serve the papers. I stood up. I looked at my grandmother, this terrifying, magnificent woman who had played the long game better than anyone I had ever met. Thank you, I said. For the letter, for seeing me. Stand straight, Mila, she said. It was the same advice she had given me years ago. But this time, I understood it. And tell that husband of yours he is welcome at Thanksgiving, but only if he brings his own wine. I do not trust anyone else's taste. I walked out of the study. I walked out of the house. I walked down the long driveway to where the road curved toward the coffee shop. The sun was fully up now, burning off the morning mist. I felt lighter. The invoice was canceled. The debt was cleared. And as I walked, I thought about Marianne. I thought about her driving here right now, rehearsing her lines, practicing her tears, preparing to manipulate a mother she thought was old and weak. She had no idea. She thought she was walking into a negotiation. She didn't know she was walking into a sentencing hearing. And the judge was the only person on earth who knew exactly what she was worth. You might think that after Grandma Nora's ultimatum, my mother would retreat. You might think she would go home, lock the doors, and wait for the axe to fall. But that assumes Marianne Knight operates according to logic. She does not. She operates according to ego. And when a narcissist is cornered, they do not surrender. They scorch the earth. I returned to Colorado on Monday. I went back to my desk at Stonebridge Ledgerworks on Tuesday morning, craving the boredom of spreadsheets. I wanted to bury myself in data that had nothing to do with my family. I wanted to forget the sound of my mother's voice screaming about legacy, but Marianne was not done. On Wednesday morning, the attacks began. They did not start with a confrontation. They started with notifications. My LinkedIn profile suddenly had a surge of views. Then came the emails, not to me, but to my colleagues. My boss, a stoic man named David, called me into his office at 10 o'clock. He looked uncomfortable. "Mila," he said, turning his monitor toward me. "We received an email this morning from a woman claiming to be a concerned relative. She suggests that you are currently under investigation for extortion and elder abuse in New York State." I stared at the screen. The email was sent from a burner account, but the syntax was unmistakable. It used words like instability, mental health crisis, and financial predation. It was Marianne's voice, digitized. "She is trying to trigger a compliance review," I said, my voice steady despite the anger boiling in my gut. "If I am flagged for financial misconduct, I lose my clearance to handle client data." "Exactly," David said. "She isn't just venting. She is trying to get you fired." "It is retaliation," I explained. "I uncovered fraud she committed. She is trying to discredit the witness." I spent the next hour filing incident reports with our internal security team. I showed them the cost of raising a failure invoice. I showed them the cease and desist letter I had drafted with Uncle Robert. I had to expose my deepest family shame to the HR department just to keep my job. But Marianne was not satisfied with digital warfare. She needed a physical stage. At 2 p.m, the reception desk called me. "Mila, there is a woman here to see you. She says she is your mother. She is demanding to speak to the head of human resources." My blood ran cold. Stonebridge Ledgerworks is a secure facility. We handle sensitive financial data. You do not just walk in. "Do not let her pass the turnstiles," I told the receptionist. "I am coming down. Call security." I texted Wyatt. "She is here." He replied instantly. "I am 5 minutes away." I took the elevator down to the lobby. Through the glass walls, I saw her. Marianne had flown halfway across the country, not to apologize, but to burn my life down. She was wearing a tailored suit, looking every inch the concerned matriarch. She was speaking to the young receptionist with a tone of urgent, hushed confidentiality. "I am just so worried about her," I heard Marianne say as I approached. "She has been having episodes, manic episodes. I believe she's a danger to your company's data. I have a duty to warn you." "Marianne," I said. She turned. Her eyes were bright, feverish. She didn't look tired. She looked energized by the conflict. "Mila," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Oh, thank God. I came as soon as I could. We need to get you help. I told these nice people that we need to arrange a leave of absence for you." She was doing it. She was enacting the plan she had set up with the invoice. She was painting me as the unstable daughter, the failure, the liability. "You need to leave," I said. "Now." "I am not leaving until I speak to your supervisor," she declared, raising her voice so the people in the lobby could hear. "You are not well. Mila, you are imagining things. Forging documents, trying to blackmail your own grandmother." The security guard, a large man named Marcus, who I chatted with every morning, stepped forward. "Ma'am," Marcus said, "I need you to step away from the desk." "I am her mother," Marianne shouted, dropping the mask. "She is a criminal. She stole my identity. I am here to report a crime." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I pulled out my phone and hit record. "You are trespassing," I said calmly, "and you are slandering an employee in her place of business. This is all going into the file. Mother, keep talking. You are just writing your own confession." Wyatt burst through the revolving doors then. He didn't run, but he moved with a terrifying purpose. He walked straight to my side, placing himself between me and Marianne. "Get out," Wyatt said. His voice was low, vibrating with a rage I had never heard before. Wyatt, Marianne scoffed. The enabler. Did she show you the fake bank statements too? Did she tell you she is trying to destroy the family? She showed me the truth, Wyatt said. And she showed the FBI the truth. You are done here. Marianne. Marcus, the guard, took Marianne's arm. Ma'am, you are leaving, or you are leaving in handcuffs. Marianne shook him off. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing into slits. You think you have won, she hissed. But you don't know what I have. You don't know what I can prove. You are going to wish you had paid that invoice. She turned and stormed out, her heels clicking violently against the marble floor. I was shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the confrontation. I looked at Wyatt. She is desperate, I said. She is dangerous, he corrected. That evening, the legal assault arrived. A courier delivered a heavy envelope to our home. It was a formal cease and desist letter from a lawyer I didn't recognize, likely someone Marianne had hired in a panic. The letter accused me of defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and unauthorized access to private financial records. It demanded that I retract my statements, destroy the ledger folder, and sign a non-disclosure agreement. But as I read the text, I started to laugh. What? Wyatt asked, looking up from his laptop where he was monitoring our credit reports. She made a mistake, I said. Look at paragraph 4. I handed him the letter. While Mrs. Knight acknowledges that certain accounts were opened in her daughter's name, these actions were taken as a custodian for the benefit of the family estate, and Mrs. Knight maintained full control and oversight of said funds at all times. She admitted it, Wyatt said, his eyes widening. She just admitted on legal letterhead that she controlled the accounts she claimed yesterday she knew nothing about. She is trying to argue that she had permission, I said. But by claiming she had full control, she just confessed to the actus reus of the wire fraud. She just handed the district attorney a signed confession. The phone rang. It was late, almost midnight. I looked at the caller ID. It was Blair. I hesitated. I hadn't spoken to my sister since she sobbed in Nora's living room. Put it on speaker, Wyatt said. I answered. What do you want? Blair. I need help, Blair whispered. She sounded like she was hiding in a closet. Mila. She is crazy. She is actually crazy. Marianne. She came to my house, Blair said. Her voice was trembling. After she left your office, she flew back and came here. She told Grant that if I didn't back her up, if I didn't testify that you gave me those credit cards, she would tell everyone about everything. About the shopping, I asked. No, Blair said. About the other thing, the thing with Grandma. I sat up straighter. What thing with Grandma? I can't, Blair sobbed. If I tell you, I go to jail too. Blair, I said sharply, you are already in trouble. The only way out is to trade up. You are the small fish. Marianne is the shark. If you give me the shark, maybe the prosecutors will go easy on the minnow. There was a long silence. Then, the sound of a deep breath. Check your email, Blair said. I just forwarded you something from 2 years ago. I kept it because I was scared of her even then. I opened my laptop. The email arrived with a ding. It was dated 3 months before the cost of raising a failure invoice was sent. It was from Marianne to Blair. Subject, the contingency plan. Blair. Nora is asking questions again about the trust disbursement. She is getting sharper, not duller. We need to accelerate the competency hearing. If we can get Dr. Evans to sign off on the dementia diagnosis, we can freeze her control over the estate before she initiates an audit. In the meantime, I am preparing a file on Mila. If Nora tries to bring Mila in as a forensic resource, we need to make sure Mila looks completely unreliable. I am going to draft a summary of her debts to the family. If we paint her as a financial failure now, no judge will trust her testimony later. I stared at the screen. The air left the room. The cost of raising a failure invoice wasn't just spite. It wasn't just a mother lashing out. It was a tactical maneuver in a larger war. Marianne had been planning to have her own mother declared mentally incompetent, so she could seize control of the estate. And she had built the Mila is a failure narrative specifically to neutralize me as a potential threat to that plan. She wasn't just destroying my past. She was preemptively destroying my credibility to protect her future coup. "Oh my God," I whispered. "She wanted to put Grandma in a home," Blair said on the phone, her voice barely audible. "She had the papers drawn up. She just needed a doctor to sign them. She told me if I didn't help her, she would cut off my credit cards." "You knew," I said. "You knew she was going to do this to Grandma, and you said nothing." "I was scared," Blair cried. "You don't know what she's like when she's angry." "I do know," I said. "I have an invoice to prove it." I hung up. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't offer her comfort. I forwarded the email to Gideon Hart. Then I forwarded it to Nora. 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. It was Nora. "Grandma," I said. "Did you see it?" "I saw it," Nora said. Her voice was not angry. It was terrifyingly calm. It was the voice of a woman who had just realized that the snake she raised wasn't just biting her, it was trying to swallow her whole. "I suspected she was greedy," Nora said. "I did not know she was plotting a coup." "She is dangerous, Grandma," I said. "She is cornered. She attacked me at work today." "I know," Nora said. "Gideon told me, and now I have read this email." There was a pause. "Pack a bag, Mila," Nora said. "I just got back to Colorado." I protested. "Come back," she commanded. "Not for a reunion, for a sentencing." "Is she coming?" "She has no choice," Nora said. "I have frozen the accounts. Her card stopped working an hour ago. She is currently stranded at the airport in Syracuse. I have sent a car for her. You are bringing her to the house." "I am bringing everyone to the house," Nora said. "The aunt who laughed at your invoice, the cousin who made jokes about your loans, and Marianne." "And who else?" I asked. "A man named Detective Miller," Nora said. "And Gideon. And you." "Why me?" I asked. "I have given you everything." "Because," Nora said, "you are the only one who can translate the numbers into a language they cannot ignore. Marianne thinks she can spin a story. I need you to read the ledger." "When?" "Tomorrow night," Nora said. "The final supper. Be there." We flew back the next morning. The travel felt like a blur. I was operating on 3 hours of sleep and pure cold fury. When we arrived at the lake house, the mood was funereal. The family was there, the core group of enablers who had clucked their tongues at me on Mother's Day. They were sitting in the living room, looking terrified. They had heard the rumors. They knew the money had been cut off. Marianne was there. She was sitting in the same spot she had occupied during the reunion, but she looked diminished. Her suit was rumpled. Her hair was slightly out of place. Without the armor of her wealth, without the credit cards that worked, she looked smaller, but she still had her pride. When I walked in, she glared at me. "You are happy now, aren't you?" she spat. "You dragged us all into the mud." "I didn't drag anyone," I said. "I just drained the swamp. You were the one standing at the bottom." Nora entered the room. She was followed by Gideon Hart and a man in a cheap suit who had the weary, cynical eyes of a financial crimes investigator. Nora did not sit. She stood by the fireplace, under the empty space where the cost of raising a failure frame had once stood. "We are here," Nora began, "because for 30 years, I allowed a lie to grow in this house. I watered it with money. I fed it with silence." She looked at Marianne. "I thought I was raising a daughter," Nora said. "But it appears I was raising a conspirator." "Mother, please," Marianne started, her voice shaking. "That email Blair is lying. She is trying to save herself. I never intended to—" "Stop," Nora said. She didn't shout. She just held up a hand. "We are past the point of stories. Marianne, tonight, we look at the documents." She pointed to me. "Mila," Nora said, "open the file on the competency hearing." Marianne's face went white. She lunged forward. as if to grab the iPad from my hands. "No," she screamed. "You cannot show that that is privileged, that is medical." Detective Miller stepped forward. He didn't touch her. He just stood in her path. "Sit down, Mrs. Knight," he said. Marianne stopped. She looked at the detective. She looked at the family. She looked at me. And in that moment, she realized the trap hadn't just sprung. It had been bolted shut. She had tried to paint me as the villain to cover her tracks. But all she had done was hand me the flashlight, and now I was going to shine it into the darkest corner of her soul. The air in the living room was not hot, but it felt heavy, like the atmosphere before a tornado touches down. We were all seated. Marianne was on the sofa. I was in a chair opposite her. The rest of the family, the aunts, uncles, and cousins, who had served as the audience for my execution only 48 hours ago, were scattered around the room. Perched on ottomans and standing by the walls, they were no longer spectators, they were witnesses. Gideon Hart did not pace. He stood perfectly still next to the fireplace, holding a single manila folder. He looked at Marianne over the rim of his glasses. "We are not here to discuss feelings, Marianne," Gideon said. His voice was dry, precise, and utterly devoid of warmth. "We are here to discuss a timeline. I am going to read a series of dates and actions. You will remain silent until I am finished." Marianne opened her mouth to protest, but Detective Miller, standing by the door, shifted his weight. She closed her mouth. October 14th, 2019. Gideon read, "You forged a deed transfer purporting to grant you 20% ownership of this estate. November 2nd, 2019. You used that forged deed to secure a line of credit for $75,000 from a private lender." A gasp rippled through the room. Aunt Sarah put a hand over her mouth. "May 18th, 2020, Gideon continued. You applied for an economic injury disaster loan using the identity of Mila Knight. You received $149,900. You transferred those funds to your personal LLC. He turned the page. The sound of the paper turning was the only noise in the room. January 12th, 2021. You initiated contact with Dr. Evans regarding a competency evaluation for your mother, Nora Halstead. You claimed in your correspondence that she was displaying signs of advanced dementia and financial recklessness. Nora sat in her armchair, her face like stone. She watched her daughter listen to the record of her own betrayal. And finally, Gideon said, looking up, May 9th, 2026, you sent an invoice to 52 people titled, Cost of Raising a Failure. You claimed this was an act of tough love. Marianne could not help herself. She stood up. It was, she cried, her voice shrill and desperate. I was trying to help her. I was trying to wake her up. You are twisting everything to make me look like a criminal, but I am just a mother who was pushed too far. She looked around the room, pleading with her eyes. She looked at Uncle Robert. She looked at Cousin Greg. You know me, she begged them. You know how much I sacrifice for this family. You know I would never hurt Mother. I was worried about her. She is old. She forgets things. I was trying to protect the estate for all of us. For a moment, I saw a flicker of hesitation in Aunt Sarah's eyes. Marianne was good. She was a master of emotional leverage. She was pulling on the strings of shared history, trying to turn the room back into a family gathering where forgiveness is mandatory. She is lying, I said. Marianne whipped her head toward me. You shut up. You are the one who started this. You are the one who hates this family. I don't hate this family, I said. I just decided to stop funding it. I picked up my phone. I connected it to the Bluetooth speaker on the side table. You say the invoice was tough love, I said to Marianne. You say you wanted to help me, but tough love doesn't require a cover story. I looked at the family. After the reunion, I explained, I went through my cloud backups. I found an old voicemail from 3 years ago. It was a pocket dial. Marianne didn't know she had called me. She was talking to someone else. Based on the context, I believe she was talking to her lawyer. I pressed play. The audio was slightly muffled, the sound of fabric rustling against a microphone. But the voice was unmistakably Marianne's, and the tone was not the weeping mother, it was the cold, calculating strategist. We have to make sure Mila looks unstable. If Nora dies or if we push the competency hearing, Mila is the only one who will actually read the trust documents. She is a risk analyst. For God's sake, she will see the gaps. There was a pause in the recording. Then Marianne's voice returned, sharper this time. So we destroy her credibility first. We paint her as a financial disaster. I will say she has debts. I will say she is erratic. If I label her a failure loud enough, nobody will believe her when she tries to audit me. We poison the well before she can drink from it. I stopped the recording. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a grave. Marianne was standing in the center of the room, but she looked as if she had been struck by lightning. Her mouth hung open. There was no defense for this. There was no, "I did it for the family" spin that could cover the naked malice of her own voice plotting to destroy her daughter to hide a theft. "You weren't teaching me a lesson," I said softly. "You were building a firewall." Uncle Robert stood up slowly. He looked like a man waking up from a long, bad dream. "The investment club," he said. His voice was hollow. Marianne flinched. "Robert, no, that is different. That is—" "2 years ago," Robert said, staring at her. "You told me you had a private opportunity, high yield. You told me to put the money in the LLC account because it was faster. You said you were handling it personally." He walked toward her. "Where is my $60,000? "Marianne." "It is safe," Marianne stammered, backing away. "It is invested. The market is just down right now." "And Aunt Linda's bridge loan?" Cousin Greg asked, standing up from the ottoman. "The $20,000 she gave you for the roof repairs on Nora's house. I checked the roof. Marianne, those shingles are 10 years old." The dam broke. Suddenly, the room was not a family gathering. It was a mob of victims, one by one. They realized that the Mila is a failure story had been a distraction for everyone. While they were busy judging me for my alleged incompetence, Marianne had been picking their pockets. "You took money from the joint account," my Aunt Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "The money for Mom's headstone. You said the bank made an error." Marianne was spinning in a circle, looking for an exit, looking for an ally, but there were none. She had used them all. "Enough," Nora said. Nora did not shout. She simply tapped her cane on the floor once. The sharp crack silenced the room instantly. Nora remained seated, but she seemed to tower over everyone. She looked at Marianne with a terrifying, final clarity. "I have heard enough," Nora said. "Gideon, give her the paper." Gideon Hart stepped forward. He pulled a thick envelope from his folder. He did not hand it to Marianne gently. He extended it like a weapon. "What is this?" Marianne whispered, her hands shaking so hard she could barely hold the paper. "That is a formal notice of your removal," Gideon said. "Effective immediately. You are removed as a beneficiary of the Halstead Family Trust. You are removed as executor. You are removed as Nora's medical proxy." "You can't do that," Marianne hissed. "I will sue. I have rights. Read the second page," Nora said. Marianne flipped the page. Her eyes scanned the text. She stopped. She read it again. This says, "It says that I have filed a criminal complaint against you with the District Attorney of New York," Nora said. "For forgery, for grand larceny, for identity theft, and for the attempted defrauding of a senior citizen." "You called the police on me," Marianne gasped. She looked at her mother as if Nora had pulled a knife. "I am your daughter. And that is why this is the hardest thing I have ever done," Nora said. Her voice broke, just for a second, revealing the immense pain beneath the iron facade. "But you left me no choice. A mother protects her children. Marianne, and I'm protecting Mila, and Blair, and myself. I am protecting us from you." Detective Miller stepped forward. "Marianne Knight," he said, I am serving you with a summons. You are required to surrender your passport by tomorrow morning. You are not to leave the state, and you are to have no contact with Nora Halstead or Mila Knight. No contact, Marianne screamed. I live here. This is my house. Not anymore, Caleb said. We all turned. My father was standing by the window. He had been silent for 30 years. He had been the shadow in the corner, the enabler who signed the checks and looked the other way. He walked over to Marianne. He looked at her. Really looked at her. For the first time in decades. Caleb, Marianne said, clutching his arm. Tell them this is insane. Tell them to get out. Caleb gently removed her hand from his arm. He stepped back. I am not going to cover for you anymore, Marianne, he said. His voice was quiet, sad, and absolutely final. I spent my whole life thinking you were just ambitious. I thought you wanted the best for us. But you just wanted the best for you. Caleb, she shrieked. I am leaving, Caleb said. I am going to stay at the motel tonight. Tomorrow, I am going back to our house to pack. I will send for the rest. You are leaving me. Marianne stared at him, stunned. The loss of her husband didn't hurt her heart, I knew. It hurt her image. A divorced woman facing criminal charges was not the role she wanted to play. I am saving myself, Caleb said. He looked at me. I am sorry. Mila, I should have stopped her when you were 6. I should have stopped her 1,000 times. It is okay, Dad, I said. You are stopping her now. Caleb walked out the front door. He didn't look back. Marianne stood alone in the center of the room. Her husband was gone. Her mother had disowned her. Her victims were surrounding her. She turned to Blair. Blair, Marianne said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Help me. You know I did this for you. Tell them. Blair was sitting on the sofa, her face puffy from crying. Grant, her husband, was sitting next to her, but there was a foot of distance between them on the cushion. He wasn't holding her hand. I can't, Mom, Blair said. I gave Mila the email. Marianne recoiled, as if Blair had slapped her. You traitor. I am not a traitor, Blair said, her voice weak but steady. I am just tired of being your accomplice. I don't want to go to jail, and I don't want to be you. Blair looked at me. There was no hatred in her eyes anymore, just a profound, exhausted shame. She knew her marriage was likely over. She knew her reputation in town was destroyed, but by handing over that email, she had bought herself the one thing Marianne didn't have, a future. It would be a hard future, a lonely one, but it would be hers. Marianne looked around the room one last time. She realized the audience had left the theater. There was no one left to clap. You will all regret this, she spat. You will see. You need me. We need you to leave, Nora said. Detective Miller gestured toward the door. Mrs. Knight, it is time. Marianne straightened her jacket. She lifted her chin, even in defeat. She tried to walk like a queen, but as she passed me, she faltered. She stopped and looked at me. I gave you life, she hissed. And then you sent me a bill for it, I said. Consider it paid. She walked out into the night. We heard the detective's car door close. We heard the engine start. And then, she was gone. The room let out a collective breath. It was over. The monster had been banished. I walked over to Nora. She looked exhausted. She looked every minute of her 82 years. Are you okay? I asked, kneeling beside her chair. No, Nora said honestly. I am not okay. I have lost a daughter, but I have found a granddaughter. It is a fair trade. I think... She reached out and touched my face. Her hand was cool and dry. You did good. Mila, you stood straight. I had help, I said, looking at Wyatt. Wyatt was standing by the fireplace, watching me. He hadn't said a word during the confrontation. He knew I didn't need him to speak for me. I just needed him to witness me. I walked over to him. He took my hand. Ready to go home? He asked. Yes, I said. Home. We left the next morning. We drove away from the lake house, away from the shattered family, away from the ghosts of my childhood. When we got back to Colorado, the house was quiet. It smelled of dust and peace. I sat down at my desk. I opened my laptop. There, on the desktop, was the folder, Ledger. I opened it. I looked at the files one last time. The invoice, the bank transfers, the credit reports, the recording. I didn't delete them. A risk analyst never deletes data. You archive it. You keep it safe. Because you never know when you might need to reference the past to protect the future. I right-clicked on the folder. I selected Rename. I typed one word, Closed. Then I moved it to an external hard drive, ejected the drive, and put it in the bottom drawer of my desk. I stood up and walked into the kitchen where Wyatt was making coffee. The sun was coming over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. It was a new day, and for the first time in 33 years, I didn't owe anyone a single penny for the privilege of seeing it. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please comment down below with your city or country. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Juliet Revenge Stories. Hit the like button and smash that hype button to help this story get heard by more people who might need to know that they don't have to pay for someone else's crimes.